Hey there, this is a Seraphine counter video intended to fill you in on everything you need to know to deal with Seraphine when she's on the opposite team. If there's a champion you find yourself struggling with in your solo queue games and you're tired of banning it, then feel free to drop a comment and let us know. If you're interested in learning more about Seraphine or any other champion, then head on over to the Mobalytics website where you can see everything you need to know, including builds, combos, pro builds, tips and more. So first off, what does Seraphine do? Seraphine is a teamfight and support with a high utility kit. She's strong from a distance due to her high range abilities, and she has a huge lane presence with a poke and healing. Honing in on that, Seraphine's strengths are a heavy CC based kit which allows for insane teamfight potential, her great poke and lane which allows her to harass opponents and whittle them down, and finally her AoE healing and sustain which you can use to reset fights and keep her allies alive. Now for her weaknesses, she's very squishy and has a low base movement speed, so she's a vulnerable target when jumped on. She's very reliant on skill shots for her high impact abilities, so if the enemy team manages to dodge or you simply whiff them, you'll be in trouble. And finally, she's reliant on teammates following up on your CC with their damage. We're going to dive in specifically how to counter Seraphine, but first here's an overview of the major tips that we'll be breaking down further in this video. First off, look to catch her out when she is split from teammates, such as when she's warding. Avoid frightening choke points, as this can allow her to pull off an easy ultimate on multiple targets. Pay attention to her passive to avoid getting poked by an echoed ability or empowered autos. Respect her extended ult range as it extends through her allies, and also be cautious about her ability to flash ultimate to catch you out. Finally, build early sustain to deal with a poke in lane. If you're going into a game against a Seraphine, there's a solid basis to remember and will help you be successful. It's always good to think about when a champion is strongest or weakest. Seraphine is strong throughout the whole game, but mainly excels in mid to late game teamfights. She excels when stacking with the teammates to extend her ult range. Now Seraphine doesn't really have a weak point in the game, however early game she is very easy to gank and punish due to a low movement speed and high ultimate cooldown. She is vulnerable when split from her teammates, so always look to catch and punish her. Handling Seraphine's early game is important as it's the best time to look to take her out of the game. When you're facing up against her in lane, the key is to simply try to dodge as much of her poke as you can. You can build early sustain on your first back to help deal with it if you're struggling to dodge. When Seraphine gets her passive off, it echoes her last ability, and if she uses this with her E, she could root you. Try to avoid trading when she has a passive up, as the root can be very punishing and the damage from abilities and empowered auto can follow this to force you out of lane. Seraphine's E and R have very long ranges, so you want to make sure you can see her casting it so that you can react. Don't let her sit in the fog of war and catch you out with these abilities. When Seraphine's ability is on cooldown, she is very vulnerable and offers very little damage, so try to force a trade in that window and punish her for it. More specifically, her W cooldown. Early on, it's her only defensive ability and has a very long cooldown. When dealing with Seraphine in the mid game, look to abuse her when she's warding, as she has low base movement speed and is vulnerable when isolated. She's heavily reliant on her team escorting her, and if she gets a bit too brave, you can easily catch her out and burst her down. Seraphine's range allows her to catch you out from a distance from the fog of war, so always be attentive to the jungle and brushes when you can't see her on the map. Seraphine's ultimate can catch out a whole team if used well. Seraphine is the queen of teamfights, and that is heavily reliant on either using her ult or just simply the threat of her ult. If she's used it ineffectively, you'll want to look to force fights and punish her for it. Any teamfight where she doesn't have her ultimate is a fight far more likely for you to win. Objectives are usually a real focal point in mid game, and they are the start of frequent teamfights. Sneaking or just taking these off the map when Seraphine or the opposing team aren't near them is a great way to avoid an obvious teamfighting opportunity. The less opportunities Seraphine has to teamfight, the less effective she will be. In the late game, Seraphine is incredibly powerful and needs to be answered, as the value she gets in teamfights is huge. Seraphine will always be behind her teammates looking for a max range ultimate as it extends through her allies. You can use this to your advantage, as most of the time her location will be predictable, especially when in open lanes. You can look to go behind and catch her off guard and kill her before the fight is even started. Additionally, when flanking Seraphine, the chance of her connecting an ultimate on multiple people are significantly reduced. As we've discussed through this guide, Seraphine is very punishable due to her low movement speed and squishiness. She has tons of peel and loads of AoE healing and CC, most of which will help her keep her carries alive even when your whole team is trying to take them down. Instead of focusing everything on those carries, focus your CC on Seraphine, and then you can either burst her or focus her carries, as you can no longer peel for them. In the late game, it's very easy to just constantly teamfight until one team wins the game. However, when there's strong team fighters like Seraphine, you can look to split up into several lanes and make the odds more in your favour. Forcing Seraphine into a 2v2 or a 3v3 rather than a huge team fight can make your other lanes punish their respective solo fights and potentially take out important structures. When playing against Seraphine, there are a variety of items you can build to help deal with it. QSS is a perfect item to go for Seraphine, as not only does it give you a chunk of magic resistance, it also gives you a get out of jail free card for her ultimate and root. If you get hit by her ultimate in a team fight, it quite often will result in the end of the fight for you unless you have this item. Another great option to go for is some anti-heal, whether that's Executioner's Calling or Morellonomicon. Later on in the game, Seraphine does a good amount of healing throughout fights, and combining this with a good chunk of burst damage will significantly reduce her effectiveness. You can also opt for a Banshee's Veil or an Edge of Night for the spell shield. This will allow you to block part of a combo or ideally block her ultimate. Getting this item can be great at baiting out cooldowns, especially if you play aggressively around it when it's just about to come off cooldown. The last thing to mention is that lifesteal is a great thing to buy, especially in lane vs Seraphine as she is such a strong lane bully. Getting an early Vampiric Scepter will make your life a lot easier and make her struggle to force you back. Aside from that, as the game goes on, just grab yourself some Magic Resist. Champion does a fair amount of damage depending on the build path, and Magic Resist will definitely bring that down a notch. That wraps everything up for our Seraphine counter video. If you enjoyed this video, then you can find more counter videos on our website or in the playlist link below, and be sure to subscribe to be alerted for when we cover a new champion. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again.